Hi, I'm Philip Kiley, and this is Cold Email for Interesting People. You're watching the video mini course, which is 1/3 of the product. As a companion to the handbook and 6 annotated examples, this lesson focuses on the qualitative aspects of cold emailing. With the knowledge from this video, you'll be ready to follow the specific approach outlined in the handbook to do your own outreach based on the models from the 6 annotated examples. I'll keep my background brief in case you've heard it before. 6 days before I graduated from college, I published my first book, Writing for Software Developers, which did over $20,000 in sales in its first week. To write that book, I relied not only on my own experience as an author of technical content, but I also reached out to 11 influential people in the industry whose work I admire and secured interviews with them to use in the text of the book. This made the product way better and way more successful. But that wasn't my first time sending cold emails. Before that, I sent cold emails to publishers to get articles secured, to prospective clients to find my first and subsequent freelancing jobs, and before that to employers, professors, and just people whose work I admired. Since publishing the book, cold email has been an essential tool in accelerating my career to where it is today. I've been able to appear on podcasts and talk to people whose work I've followed for years, and I also used a cold email to get my current job as the head of marketing at Gumroad. You'll be able to take a look at some of these emails in the 6 annotated examples. Cold email has been an invaluable tool in my career, and I created this mini course and cold email for interesting people as a whole in order to help you use the exact same tactics to get ahead. I'm going to start out by defining cold email and interesting people. From there, I'm going to talk about thinking like your recipient, formulating a specific ask, overcoming objections, and then talk about social proof, value, and gratitude. So what is cold email? Well, cold email is quite simply the practice of sending email to people who you don't know. So the cold part doesn't refer to the tone of the email or the weather outside when you send it, but it's about the nature of your relationship with the person who you're emailing. If it's not someone who you know or have some pre-existing professional connection with, well then they're a cold contact, thus it's a cold email. And then we're talking about email to mean really any sort of asynchronous written communication. Sure, some of the things in this course are going to be helpful if you're trying to call someone on the phone out of the blue, or if you're meeting someone at a conference or event. But what this is specifically designed for is writing a message that's going to go into someone's inbox that they're going to read when they get around to it and hopefully reply to. So cold, someone you don't know; email, asynchronous, written, long-form communication too, I should say. You're going to keep these emails as short as possible, but they're still going to be longer than a text message or maybe a Twitter DM. So within this realm, there's actually a lot of stuff that you can do. Cold email is a super powerful tool, as I've already discussed, and there's a lot of flexibility in how you construct one of these. That said, they're still going to rely on a few key principles. So to talk about the other half of the title, interesting people, well, who's an interesting person? You are, I bet, to someone. That's the thing. Being interesting is circumstantial, it's situational, it's subjective. It's not like someone just wakes up one day and the universe hands them a gold star and says, "Here, you are now an interesting person." If I were reaching out to Tom Brady because I had a great idea for a play that he should run in the next game, I don't think he'd find that very interesting because I don't really know anything about football. But if I was reaching out to an author and asking them a question about their work and maybe suggesting something that they could add to the next edition of their book, well, if that author maybe writes about software engineering, they might actually find me interesting because I'm talking about something that we have shared knowledge in. So that's the thing. Being interesting is an action, not a state of being. And interesting people do interesting things. Interesting people say interesting things. Interesting people don't waste each other's time, and interesting people want to get to know other interesting people. So being an interesting person, again, situational, but it's up to you. And it's up to you to develop situations in which you can connect with people who are going to find each other interesting. Alright, I've said the word interesting like 100 times, it's losing all meaning. Let me move on to people. The tactics that I'm going to talk about here are much better for reaching out to individuals, even if it's an individual on the behalf of an organization, rather than just reaching out to a company as a whole. Because with an individual, you can write a highly targeted message that's going to speak to them directly. So if you want to contact Apple, you should instead think about who at Apple you want to contact. And sure, talking to Tim Cook sounds like a great time. I would love to talk to Tim Cook. I've never sent Tim Cook a cold email though, because I've never had any need to. That's the thing, there should always be a reason why behind any of these cold emails that you're sending. Don't just send them for the sake of sending them. Have something to say, have something to ask. So back to emailing Apple. Let's say I want to find out something about their newest press release. Well, I'm probably going to want to send an email to someone who works in the press department. If I want to find out something about an API that I'm trying to use, I might contact someone in developer relations. The thing to understand is that your message has to hit the right inbox to even have a chance of being considered. So think about who is the person who's going to be able to best help you, and then write to them, because that shows that you're doing your research up front. All of this stuff works even better if you're writing directly to an individual, because you're able to connect to them as a person, and as John Green says, imagine them complexly. Cold emailing successfully requires a lot of psychology and empathy to really get correct. The first thing to understand is just how busy whoever you're emailing is. A lot of the people who I've sent emails to receive more emails every single day than they could conceivably respond to, even if all they did all day, 7 days a week, was respond to emails. Just because so many people are seeking their attention, seeking their help, wanting to ask them about things. So the first thing to understand is that the person who's reading this message is super busy. Sure, they probably want to read these messages, hear from their fans, hear from people with ideas for them, but you have to do something to stand out in a packed inbox full of messages. So you're thinking like your recipient. They're scrolling through their inbox and you want them to click on your email. That means you have to have a clear, compelling subject line so that they understand what they're getting into. From there, you have to understand that no matter how well written your email is, they're probably not going to immediately dive in and start reading it deeply. They're going to start skimming. You want your email to be brief and to the point. You want short paragraphs where every paragraph has a first sentence that clearly communicates what the paragraph is about. You want bullet points, you want formatting, you want to avoid massive walls of text. You want to make it as easy as possible for this person to determine whether or not your email is worth their continued attention. Thinking like your recipient goes beyond just the structure of your message, though. It should also inform its contents. When you're writing the email, think, is this something that my recipient really needs to know, or is it just something that I want to say? And if it's just something you want to say, cut it. Just include the important, pertinent information. Making your emails clear and direct proves that you value your reader's time and is a good signal that you know what you're doing. You also want to make sure that your tone is something that your recipient's going to respond well to. Patrick McKenzie talks about writing with restrained professional confidence. I think that's a great phrase. The idea is you want to present yourself well to the person who you're writing to, but you don't want to come across as overbearing. So one important question we haven't covered yet is, why are you writing this email in the first place? Well, you're probably writing the email to ask for something. And when you ask for something, it should be just one thing, and it should be a specific and original request. When I say specific, I mean as precise as possible. It's really easy to ask for something vague, like, hey, can we work together? Or, can you mentor me? But what's going to be a lot more effective is asking for exactly what you want. So if you are saying, hey, can we work together? And you mean, I have this project in mind, here's your role, here's what I'm going to do, here's how much time it's going to take for you, and here's the potential payoff. That request, well scoped for the person who you're writing to, is going to be a lot easier to evaluate and say yes or no to. Similarly, your request should be original. You shouldn't write to someone to ask them a question where you can find the answer on Google or in one of their previous works. If you're going to ask someone a question, it should be something that they haven't answered publicly before, because that shows that you've done your research and it's going to make them more likely to actually want to respond to you and find your whole email interesting and compelling. Asking for things can be tough, and it can be tempting to just bury the request in the email, or maybe just send them an email and see if they write back and then ask for something, or to make your request understated or otherwise sort of disguise it. And that really isn't a good strategy. Because again, this person might just be skimming this email that you're writing. You want to make it incredibly clear why you're writing to them. So you put your request up front. Put it in the subject line if you can, or at least in the first or second paragraph, first line thereof. Because when you make your request, then you're framing the conversation. This person is going to have their first reaction already in their head, like, yes, I want to appear on this podcast, or I'm not so sure. And that means that the rest of your email is going to be dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that is overcoming objections. Overcoming objections is the most important part of writing marketing materials or sales copywriting, business-to-business email sales, all of these different places where people are trying to convince someone to do something. They're doing it by raising and overcoming objections. And, as it turns out, the best way to overcome objections is by using a skill we've already talked about, thinking like your recipient. You want to think, okay, if someone were to ask me to do this, what might my concerns be? Maybe you're asking someone to appear on your podcast. They might be concerned about how much time is this going to take? How big is your audience? Is it even going to be worth my time to do it? Is it going to be a fun conversation? Are you going to ask me questions that I haven't been asked before and maybe help me think differently about my own field? These are examples of objections or concerns that might sort of pop into someone's mind when they read this request. So what you're going to want to do is raise those objections yourself. And that might seem a little counterintuitive. Like, if the thing standing between what you want and the person is a list of their objections, why bring in more and add to that list? Well, once you've raised an objection, then you can overcome it. And there's a few different ways that you can overcome objections. One important tactic is something called social proof. And probably the biggest, most common objection to anything in a cold email is, hey, this is a cold email. I don't know this person. Why should I trust them? Why should I care what they have to say? And by providing social proof, you can overcome this objection by forging a connection that helps them understand you and care about you. This is why, for example, every university career center is going to advise its students to reach out to alums to ask for jobs. Having gone to the same school is a kind of social proof, like, hey, you got past this gatekeeper, I got past this gatekeeper, we must both be cool. But social proof comes in all kinds of forms. It can come through having a shared connection in your network, having a shared interest, especially if it's a hobby outside of your shared profession. It can be proof of work, like a blog post that you've written or an article that you've published somewhere on a topic that you and the recipient both care about. And so anytime that you can put in social proof into your email, you're proving that, hey, I'm a real person, this is a genuine request, I really care about this thing that I'm talking about here, and you should too. Another great method for overcoming objections is by providing value. Lots of people are super generous, which is awesome, and you should be ready and willing to make the most of that generosity. But also a lot of people can receive an email and think, this might be interesting, but what's in it for me? Like social proof, value is a super broad term. And I'm not saying that every time you send someone an email, you should be offering to pay them. In fact, direct payment is probably the last form of value that you want to try. When I say providing value, I mean giving them something interesting to read or think about. I recently received an email that had a lot of interesting thoughts about some stuff from my book, but the person who sent me that email also took the time to point out a couple of typos that had slipped through the editing of writing for software developers. I'm definitely going to send that person back super detailed replies to all of the points they raised because I appreciate them letting me know about these typos. Anytime that you do something that the other person cares about or finds interesting or finds meaningful, that's providing value. And sometimes you can't even do that. When I was reaching out to people asking for interviews for writing for software developers, I was a college student. Couldn't offer them money, couldn't offer them access to an audience that they didn't already have. All I could offer them was, this is going to be a really interesting use of 30 or 60 minutes of your time because I've read everything you've ever written and I'm going to ask you tough questions about it. And two, I could offer my gratitude. Gratitude is an incredibly powerful emotion, and whenever you're writing a cold email to someone, they're doing you a favor just by taking the time to read it. Now, you might also be doing them a favor through whatever the email's about, but it's important to keep that at the front of your mind when you're writing and sending your emails. So that's it. We talked about what a cold email is, who to send it to, what to put in it. For more specific and actionable steps, go check out the handbook, which walks you through the exact process that I use to send cold emails. Or, if you want to see the process in action, go take a look at the 6 annotated examples where I break down emails from throughout my career that helped me get to where I am today. Thanks for watching this video and checking out the rest of the course. I hope you find it helpful and that you write great cold emails to really interesting people.